Back when the Mach 1s were new, CDC Racing and MRT, which is Mustang Racing Technologies, put together a package where you could buy a Mustang shell and try to make your own race car. And it was based off the Mach 1, even though it was not a VIN car. It did not have the VIN number on it. It did not have the R in the VIN like a Mach 1 would. I had heard they even used reject shells, ones that weren't good enough to sell as cars, but they were still good to be race cars. The point behind all this was to be able to build a car to your liking depending on what type of racing you're into. And MRT, which is Mustang Racing Technologies, was started by Scott Hogue, who was in charge of the Bullet and the Mach 1 program. So Scott is a really neat guy. You could read books about him and things like that. And he really wanted to bring to market a way to race cars like this. On a side note, one of the cool things was he took one of the engines that was a reject engine with a head tick and put it in one of these race cars, and he raced the living daylights out of it for years without any problems. So he was actually saying that the head tick really isn't an issue on these cars, and you could even race an engine that has that. But anyway, the cool thing about this was you could buy the shell, you could talk with them, and they would set you up with all the hardware and everything you needed to set one of these cars up for racing. It takes all the headache out of trying to track down nuts and bolts and pieces. Now, the good thing about this is people wouldn't be taking Mach 1s and stripping them down and turning them into race cars and getting rid of something rare, but some people would look at this like, well, I could just buy a Mach 1, sell all the good parts off it, and be a little bit ahead in that way. So the real neat thing about this was it was to be a economic way to build a race car. And there's a whole sheet here that we'll look at that shows how much it would cost to do this. Now back then, a brand new Mach 1 was $29,000 or so. I'm sure you could get a lightly used one for a little bit less than that. But they were showing that for less than $23,000 you could have a race car. So the body, which typically was painted in white, came for $1,800. The Mach 1 engine, transmission, and axle, which would be the 4.6 liter 32 valve Mach 1 engine, very great engine, and the transmission was the TR36 5-speed, as well as the axle with a 355 gear ratio, came out to just under $6,000. And then CDC Racing, Ford, using OEM parts, would sell you all the hardware and things you needed for another $6,400. And so that's where it gets a little expensive, but it takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. And then you could have the cage and dash, parts and labor, another $3,000. All the suspension components, 800, the MRT and other aftermarket parts, 3,900, somewhere around there. Track tires for 800, but that brings you to 22,700. And this is an article done that was in 5.0 magazine of where they took one and they built it up, and that's what it cost them to do it. They talked about using these hood pins where they used where the bump stops would be for the hood, and they just drilled into there. They had the battery shut off in the trunk, as well as the battery located in the trunk, and a lot of really neat things like that. You can see the Mach 1 engine in there on the front end of this car as they're building it and putting it together. I thought it was cool they had Mach 1 parts, but you can see a normal steering wheel in there just out of a regular Mustang. There's the cage, all the door hardware and everything, which as you look at this, getting the door handle to work properly could be a headache, and you have absolutely nothing in there, just a shell. Here are some of the race cars. This was Scott Hogue's yellow Mach 1 race car, and it has a ginormous wing on it and everything, but pretty cool to see a Mach 1 32 valve race car and all the stuff he did to his. He also had this blue one, and this is the one I believe that the head tick engine went into. And you can see race cars are easily made in this way. You could just get the shell and put it all together. Now they did talk about how it could be a problem and you got to get the car running yourself. And in this case, the article was talking about how they had built this one and they got it there at the track, and after the first couple laps it overheated because they had not burped the cooling system correctly. So the car had to go off the track because of that. They burped the system, got it running again, and they went out for another run, but the brake lights weren't working because they had not installed the switch correctly by the pedal. Then they got out there and they got racing around and the car backfired, shut off. They couldn't figure out what happened to it. They had to tow it off again, and the track was closing for the day anyway, so they took it back to the shop, and as they investigated, they found that the positive battery cable had been severed by the 5-link panhard bar, and that it had broken, the weld had broken, it swung loose from the right rear of the subframe. And so there were a lot of things that were causing them issues, but it wasn't issues with the car, it's just how it was put together. And it's not that their work was bad, it's just they had to do things to trial and error and fix. And so when you make a race car, you're going to run into all sorts of things like that. This car was not put together by Ford. It didn't pass all their quality control. So that's just something to consider when you're making your own race car. You never really know how it's going to run. You got to make sure that everything is done correctly. Now, other than that, they said the car ran great. They got it back on the track. It raced really nicely. It handled well. It was lightweight. They had a lot of things stripped out of the car because there's no door handles, there's no door panels. They had to put everything in it that they wanted, and they left everything out of the car that they didn't need. So it was pretty cool to see this program. I remember reading this in the magazines and seeing it in 5.0 Mustang magazine, but then I went to find the article and it was gone. And I went to the Mustang Mach 1 registry that I'm a member of, and I actually found the post that my brother had created that said, does anybody have one of these or know about these cars? And we had read about them in magazines, and we're just wondering if there's any information on these out there, because you can see they've got the shaker hood and the C-pillars and everything. Really cool to see that they based this on a Mach 1. Even the gauge cluster was from a Mach 1. And people said that they knew about the race cars that Scott Hogue had, the yellow one and the blue one, and then of course this one that was built. But there wasn't much to say about that. And as I read through that post, I saw where I had put the link to 5.0 Mustang magazine that had the whole article back then. And when I clicked on the link, it's gone now. So this information is getting lost. If you have the magazine, then you'll have the pictures and the build on this car, but the pictures wouldn't come up. Now it links you, when you search this, it links you to Motor Trend, and then it has magazine articles from other publishers in there, and you can read a lot of the articles, but a lot of the pictures are missing. So I wanted to create this video just to remember this and document it, because it is getting lost and the information is getting deleted off the internet in different places, and I thought it was really cool to see a Mach 1 race car. So if you have one of these or know somebody who had one of these, put that in the comments. I know that there are a lot of people who would prefer just to buy a good running Mach 1, especially once the values dropped on them, and then strip them out, sell all the seats and the Mach 1 specific pieces, and get some money back to put towards the race car, and then you have a running race car that you didn't have to install the engine and transmission and everything in. So there's kind of two different ways to look at it. You can skip all the stuff and work of stripping one of these cars out, or you could buy it this way. Now, I don't think this program is available anymore, and I know Ford Racing had the FR 500 program and all sorts of different things you could do with newer race cars, but I thought it was cool they did this with the New Edge, and I thought it was cool that they started with a brand new car shell and that it was based off of Mach 1. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm sure there's a lot more information we could get into, like the hood pins and the door handles, how they didn't have any side glass because it was a lot lighter. I was interested that they had bullet wheels on the car. I was interested that they didn't put an independent rear suspension in the car for road racing. They said that the 13-inch Brembo PBR brakes that the Mach 1s came with were good enough for road racing, so they used those instead of Willwoods or other big brake kits. You know, it was just really interesting to know what they did with this. But in that regard, you didn't have switches for power windows. You didn't have a lot of those commodities. But these are race cars. They are not meant to be street cars. These are cars that people are having 100% dedication to the track with. So anyway, thanks for watching. I thought this was pretty cool. Stay tuned for more Mustang content.